We've been focusing a lot on the candidates for governor, Congress, and statewide offices. This morning, we're going to focus on one of the ballot questions. Question 3, certainly it's generating the most conversation. Now, if approved, question 3 would roll back the state sales tax by more than half, from 6.25% to 3%. Joining us this morning, supporters on both sides of the issue. Joining us is Kamal Jain. He is a supporter of question 3. And Steve Crawford from the VoteNoOn3.com. In full disclosure, we want to mention that Steve Crawford is also a spokesman for congressional candidate Bill Keating. And gentlemen, we appreciate you both coming in this morning. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for having us.
Steve, we're going to start with you. Most people love to give themselves a tax cut, especially in these economic times. Some claim we're just sending people to New Hampshire now where they can make their purchases there, where there's no sales tax. Why are you saying that voting yes on 3 is not a good idea?
Well, our communities are really fragile in this economic recovery already. Cutting $2.5 billion out of the state budget will hurt our recovery, hurt our local communities, and it's just the wrong time to do it.
Kamal, you've heard these arguments, and a recent Suffolk University poll shows that 49% currently against question 3, 44% supporting it. Is your message not getting out?
Well, the fact is that our opponents, Steve and his friends, have raised almost $5 million. 97 to 99% of that has come from public sector unions. There's been one individual contribution. So they've got the money to run the scare tactic ads. The fact is that there is plenty of money in the state budget. We're talking about a net impact of about 5% of total spending. There is lots of money that can easily be cut. We want to create jobs, private sector, sustainable jobs that are good in Massachusetts, that are going to help our border towns, that are going to help all 351 of our communities by giving $2.5 billion back to the communities to help them. That's exactly what they need, not to have it go through Beacon Hill. So it's just simply a matter of getting the message out.
Steve, are you being backed more by unions? Are there regular people behind the suggestion or the idea of not rolling back the state sales tax?
Well, the teachers and firefighters and police officers and healthcare workers who have contributed to their unions, who are helping to finance our campaign, they're the backbone of our community. The fact is the proponents of this campaign get 62% of their money from out-of-state interests. One donor gave $20,000. He lives in Washington State. They have nothing to do with our state. They're not concerned about the future of our communities. And this is just, another example of the opposition failing to put out a legitimate proposal that is responsible in a way that will move our state forward.
Well, Steve, opponents, like the governor is saying, and you're agreeing with him, if question 3 passes, it would be calamitous, cuts to fire, police, other services. Yet taxpayers keep hearing and reading about, you've got administrators and teachers at public universities making over $100,000, dozens of them. You also keep hearing and reading about the pensions. You hear about a probation or parole system that is filled with patronage. Wouldn't question 3 send a message that that stuff is unacceptable? And why is it always the fire and police and teachers that are pointed to as to where those cuts would come from?
Well, clearly those things are unacceptable. What's also unacceptable is the fact that the town of Hull has eliminated its athletic programs entirely in this economic crisis. And the city of Lawrence has had to eliminate its gang unit in Lawrence. Cuts are already happening in these communities. Firefighters and police officers by the hundreds have been laid off, and we just can't afford to cut any deeper.
Kamal, yes on 3 would put cities and towns on the brink of bankruptcy. A lot of people say that, and there's already been some tough times for cities and towns in terms of finding extra cash to provide services and things, as Steve pointed out, such as athletic programs at their schools. Do you think passing question 3 would do more harm than good?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And it's a complete fallacy that cities and towns are going to have to be cut. Local aid represents about 12% of total state government spending. There's another 88% of spending that we could be going after and looking at for waste, fraud, corruption, everyday overspending. The fact is that 8 years ago, our local aid was exactly the same level it is now at $5.2 billion. And total state spending was only $38 billion back then. Not the $38 billion with a B is anything to shake your head at. But it's $51.8 billion inclusive of transfers today. We've added $13 billion to state government spending without increasing local aid. That shows you where our legislators' priorities are on Beacon Hill. If they chose to make the decision to hurt cities and towns by cutting local aid, that shows how vindictive they are. That shows that they don't care about police, firefighters, and teachers, and that protecting their sweetheart deals and special interests is more important than prioritizing things like public safety, education, our roads and bridges, and general infrastructure that are in shambles due to poor investment choices and waste. That's the real problem. What we have to have is an honest discussion about total spending, which is almost $1 billion a week, again, inclusive of transfers. It's 5% of that is all we're talking about cutting. No one, and I had the unique pleasure of being able to campaign over the last 9 months in 100 cities and towns around the state. There is not one city or town I went to in Massachusetts where I didn't have local people telling me about their own town waste and overspending and corruption, nor did I find a local official who off the record wouldn't acknowledge that they could probably make do with less money, but it was always off the record.
Well, the candidates for governor, none are in support of this. In fact, Tim Cahill said he thinks it goes too far, although he would understand the sentiment of the voters. Why go back to 3%? Why not go to 5%? Do you think if you lessen the amount that you were trying to roll it back, it might get you more support?
You know, it might. The fact is 3% was, first of all, was the original sales tax from 1966, which was supposed to be temporary and apply to a much shorter list of things than it does today. And what government always does is it grows. It's a greedy hand. It always finds ways to count more things to be taxed, to raise the taxes. Now we're at 6.25%. I live in Lowell, in the Merrimack Valley. We have been decimated by the raise in the sales and use tax. And let's be clear about this. Our state government is too big. It is unsustainable. We have the second highest government debt per capita in the country. That is not a race that we want to be at the top of. And 2 years ago, we were number one. We haven't gotten any better. Connecticut has gotten worse. And you see what's happening, you know, throughout New England. We are seeing people leaving the high tax states, moving to lower tax states, including New Hampshire, which has very similar, you know, economic circumstances, very similar weather and everything else. So we have an opportunity to make our state competitive against all 5 other New England states.
And Steve, we're short on time, but I'll give you a chance to respond.
Well, I grew up in Chelmsford, right next to Lowell, and cutting this to 3% does nothing for our competitiveness on the New Hampshire border. We still have a sales tax, and New Hampshire does not.
All right, Steve Crawford and Kamal Jain, thank you, gentlemen, both for coming in this morning and discussing and debating the merits of question 3 coming up in the ballot. Of course, we want everyone to get out there and vote coming up next Tuesday.